Welcome back everyone. In the previous video we created the player character's two animations, an idle and run animation. Now we want to get the player transitioning from that idle animation when standing still to a run one when moving left and right. To do so we'll be using the animator window, which you can find under Window, Animation, Animator. And I'll just place it somewhere here. And I'll select the player to be able to view the animator specific to that player character. And notice how there's an animator component attached to the player. If we remove it, the player no longer has any animations. This component was automatically attached to the character when we created his first animation. And you can also view the animator in your player's animation folder, next to the run and idle animations. Oh, and since we're here, make sure that the run and idle animations have the loop time box checked. This means that the animation will go on forever until a transition to some other animation takes place, which is exactly what we want. If, for example, I unchecked loop time on the idle animation and hit play, you'll see that the animation plays once and then stops, leaving the player motionless. Anyway, with the animator, you'll be greeted by this pretty simple interface made up of a few colored rectangles. There's one for each animation that our player has. So in this case, there's the idle and run animations. The idle box is orange. This means that by default, it's the idle animation that will play. You can change the character's default animation by simply right-clicking on any animation box and choosing Set Layer has default states. So if I do so for the run animation, you'll see it turns orange and connects itself to this entry box. And if I hit play, you'll notice how my character now only plays the run animation. But this isn't what we want, so I'll hit Ctrl Z a few times to undo those changes. What I'm going to now do is create transitions between these two animations. So I'll right click on that idle box and choose Make Transition. And you'll see this little arrow appear, which I'll connect to the run animation. And then I'll do the same, except this time the transition will go from the run animation to the idle animation. However, now we need to define when these transitions will take effect. So I'll left click on the one going from idle to run, and take a look at the inspector that is full of useful information about this transition. So first of all, we have this exit time. This is basically how much of the idle animation do we want to play before allowing the player to transition to the run animation. So with exit time set to 1, that means 100% of the idle animation will play before the character transitions to a run animation. In other words, the idle animation won't interrupt itself midway. But in our case, I'll just disable this exit time box. I don't mind if the character snaps very quickly from idle to run. It will look more responsive. Then we have the transition duration setting. This is how long it will take for the character to go from his idle animation to his run animation. So a value of 0.25 means the character will go into his animation pretty fast. But I'll crank this down to 0.1 to really get that transition feeling snappy and responsive, which in this sort of game is something we really want. And lastly, we can set a condition for when this transition can take place. Currently there's no condition, which explains why we get this yellow warning indicating that the transition won't work. We either need exit time checked, in which case as soon as the animation has played it will transition to something else, in this case the run, or have a condition here, and that's exactly what we want. So I'll head up here and click on this small plus sign to create a new parameter. You can choose between these four types. I'll choose the bool parameter and I'll call it isRunning. Then I'll select my transition arrow again, add a condition and set isRunning to true. So in other words, when this isRunning parameter is equal to true, this transition arrow will come to life and take our character from his idle state to his running state. Now I'll select the other arrow, uncheck exit time here too, give it a transition duration of 0.1 and add a condition. This time, however, I only want this transition to work if isRunning is equal to false. And how do we set isRunning equal to true or false? Well, that's all done with some very simple C# code. So I'll select the player and double click on the player script in the inspector to open it up. First of all, we need to grab a reference to the animator that is attached to the player, in the same way that you grabbed a reference to the 2D rigid body with Liam. So I'll make a private variable of type animator that I'll just call anim but you can name this whatever you like. And then in the start function, I'll set anim equal to getComponentAnimator. So basically the anim variable is equal to the animator attached to the player, and we can now use this to set our isRunning parameter equal to true or false, depending on whether the player is running or not. We will do so inside of the update function, which I remind you is called every single frame of our game. The reason I won't do so inside of the fixed update is because that's usually only used to move and calculate stuff related to physics. However, we're going to need this input variable, and currently that variable is specific to the fixed update function. In other words, I can't use it anywhere else except in fixed updates. To use it everywhere, I need to create a private float variable up here called input, and then just remove the float keyword here. So now I'll make an if statement here checking whether input is not equal to 0. If it isn't, well then that means the player is indeed moving. And so I'll type anim.setBool is running true. Make sure to type between quotation marks the exact name of the parameter you wrote in the animator window. Even the capital letters must be the same. And yeah, here we're setting it to true because we want the player moving from his idle animation to his run animation. However, if input is equal to 0, so else, then I'll copy and paste this line of code and change true to false so that the player transitions to his idle animation. I'll hit Ctrl S to save my script and head back to Unity to test things out. I'll hit the play button and you'll see that when the character isn't moving, he's playing his idle animation, and when he moves, he plays his run animation. Awesome. Lastly, we need to get the character facing the direction in which he moves. This is also very easy to code. We basically want to rotate the character of 180 degrees along the y-axis when he's moving left so that he faces that direction, and of course set the rotation along the y-axis back to 0 when moving right. So I'll open up the player script again and make another if statement checking whether input is greater than 0. If that's the case, then that means the player is moving right. So I'll type transform.EulerAngles is equal to a new vector3, and between the parentheses, I'll type out 3 zeros. Now, this looks a lot scarier than it really is. This is simply one way of setting the rotation values of an object. So this will make sure that the object has 0 rotation on all 3 axes, so X, Y, and Z. However, if input is less than 0, that means the player is moving left. And so I'll set the rotation equal to 180 degrees along the y-axis and leave X and Z at 0. I'll save my script and head back to Unity where I'll press play to test things out. And indeed, our character now faces the direction in which he's moving. And that'll mark the end of this video. We're making really great progress here, so well done. And again, don't worry if you don't understand everything shown in this video. Just focus on the fact that you're learning bit by bit, and that if you keep at it, eventually C# and Unity will feel like home, and you'll be able to make awesome games and even teach others if you want. With that said, in the next video you'll be back with Liam and bring to life the enemy characters. Have fun and I'll see you soon.